The scream in the trees. The jungle was alive with strange sounds. Leaves rustled. Tiny glowing insects danced in the air. Trees as tall as towers stood still under a red sky. Birds with sharp beaks called out from above, warning each other. Ray moved slowly, careful not to step on anything loud. He was a human explorer, the only one in this wild alien jungle. His boots sank into wet moss, and sweat dripped from his face. His mission was simple: map this part of the jungle for the colony. But this place was far from simple. His scanner wasn't working. The heat made it glitch. He sat on a log, trying to fix it when suddenly, a scream. A sharp, painful scream tore through the trees. Ray froze. The sound was high and full of fear. It didn't sound like an animal. It didn't sound like anything he'd heard before. It sounded like someone dying. He looked around. The jungle had gone silent. "No way," Ray whispered. "Was that real?" He waited. Nothing. His hand went to the knife at his side. Locals from nearby villages had told him stories. Stories about traps in the forest and creatures that lured people in with fake cries. But something about that scream felt real. Too real. Ray stood up. His instincts told him to walk away. But his heart told him to help. He made a choice. He grabbed his scanner and flashlight and followed the sound. The trees grew thicker as he walked. Vines wrapped around his legs. Thorns scratched his arms. But he kept going. Soon, he saw something. Blood. Small drops of blue blood on the ground. They glowed faintly. He followed the trail. More broken leaves. Crushed plants. Branches snapped. Something or someone had moved fast and fell. He heard a soft whimper. Ray stepped slowly, pushing aside the leaves in front of him. And then he saw her. An alien woman lay in a hunting trap. Thick black vines were wrapped around her ankle, covered in sharp thorns. She was pinned to a tree, hanging slightly off the ground. Her silver skin was cut and bleeding. Her eyes, large, glowing, and full of fear, met Ray's. For a second, neither of them moved. She looked young, fragile, and completely helpless. Ray raised his hand slowly. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." She didn't answer. She couldn't understand him, but her eyes said enough. She was in pain, scared, and bleeding badly. Ray looked at the trap. It was cruel, made of bones and barbed wire, hidden under leaves. Someone had set it to catch intelligent prey. "Hold still," he said, pulling out his knife. The woman tensed. "I'm trying to help," he whispered gently. He cut one vine, then another. She cried out as a thorn pierced deeper into her skin. Ray worked faster. His hands bled too, but he didn't stop. Finally, the last vine snapped. She fell into his arms. Ray held her gently. Her body was light and she was shaking. She looked up at him and her lips moved, but the words didn't make sense. "It's okay," Ray said again. "You're safe now." But then, a rustle, a low growl. Ray turned around fast. In the shadows, eyes glowed. Yellow, watching. They weren't alone. Something was nearby. Something that had set the trap. Ray lifted the alien woman and carried her slowly backward. He looked for a place to hide, but the jungle was open. No caves, no shelter, just trees. "Come on," he whispered. "Just a little farther." She pointed weakly through the trees. Ray followed her direction. Behind a thick curtain of hanging vines, he saw it, an old hollow tree, big enough to crawl inside. He ducked into the hollow trunk, placing her down gently. She whimpered in pain but nodded at him. Outside, the growl came closer. Heavy footsteps circled the area. Ray stayed still, holding his breath. The alien woman reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. Ray didn't know her name. He didn't know what species she was. But he knew one thing. She would have died alone in that trap. And now, they were both trapped together. The trap of thorns. Ray didn't sleep that night. The hollow tree was cramped and smelled like old roots, but it was the only safe place. Outside, something large moved through the trees. It sniffed the air, growled softly, then it walked away. But Ray knew it would come back. The alien woman beside him had passed out from the pain. Her leg was swollen, and blue blood slowly oozed from the wounds. The trap had done more damage than he thought. And worse, the thorns were not normal. They were alive. Ray watched one small thorn on her ankle twitch. Then it moved. He stared, horrified, as it wriggled deeper into her skin like a parasite. "No, no, no," he whispered. Without waiting, he took out his small med kit. He didn't have much, just old tools, jungle salve, and a short surgical blade. But he had to try. She wouldn't last long if the vines inside her leg reached her bloodstream. He gently cut around the thorn. Her skin twitched under his touch. She groaned in her sleep. The thorn fought back. It tried to slide away deeper, like a living worm. Ray grabbed it with tweezers and yanked. The woman gasped and sat up in pain. "Easy, easy," Ray said. Her eyes opened wide. She looked at him, panicked. Then she saw the thorn in his hand, still moving, and froze. She understood. She nodded weakly and held her leg out again. Ray worked carefully, pulling out one thorn at a time. Each one hissed or twitched as it came out. Some were already turning black at the tips like they had been poisoning her. He dropped them into a metal tin and sealed it shut. "Who sets traps like this?" he muttered. When morning came, the jungle was quiet again. Birds sang. The red light of the sky turned soft gold. It almost looked peaceful. But Ray knew better. He turned to the alien woman who was now awake and watching him. She whispered something in her language. It sounded like, "Zalar, Yenu." She pointed to herself. "Zalar," she said again. Ray smiled. "Zalar, that's your name?" She nodded. Then she touched his chest. "Yenu?" He blinked. "No, I'm Ray. Ray." She repeated it slowly. Ray. Then she smiled for the first time. Ray helped her stand. She limped badly, leaning on his shoulder. The jungle floor was uneven and slippery. Every step was a fight. But they had to move. He couldn't stay out here any longer. He pulled out his broken scanner. "Still not working." "Great," he said. "We're lost." But Zalar pointed ahead. She knew the way. Ray followed her through the tall trees, deeper into the jungle. She was weak, but her eyes were sharp. She watched for traps, avoided strange plants. She tapped Ray's arm and motioned to step lightly over patches of moss. Some of it was alive. Some tried to grab their feet. "Man," Ray whispered, "this jungle wants everything dead." But not Zalar. She belonged to it. Even wounded, even hunted. She still knew how to survive here. Suddenly she stopped. Her body tensed. Her hand shot out to stop Ray. She pointed up. Above them, hanging from a thick branch, was another bone trap. This one had rotting remains inside. It looked like a small animal, or something worse. Zalar's face turned pale. Ray realized it wasn't an animal. It was one of her people. Another silver-skinned being caught and left to rot. Zalar took a shaky breath and lowered her head. Ray felt anger rise in his chest. Someone had turned this jungle into a killing ground. Someone hunted her kind for fun, for trophies, or worse. He clenched his fists. "Who did this to you?" She didn't reply, but her eyes were wet. Then she said softly, "Hun, Car." Ray didn't know what that meant. A name? A species? A warning? But he would remember it. Hunkar. They moved again, slower now. Zalar's wounds were getting worse. Ray spotted a small clearing ahead, safe enough to rest. He laid her down gently and opened his pack. He had one ration bar left. He broke it in half and handed it to her. She took it, stared at it, then looked at him. Slowly, she took a bite. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Ray didn't understand her words, but her eyes said everything. She had been hunted, wounded, and left for dead. And now, for the first time, someone was helping her. Someone heard her scream and answered it. Eyes in the darkness. Night came fast in the jungle. The golden sky faded to deep purple. Strange lights floated through the trees. Some were insects, others were not. Sounds changed too. Gentle bird calls were replaced by distant growls, clicks, and whispers that echoed through the vines. Ray sat beside Zallar in the small clearing. A tiny fire crackled between them, made from dry leaves and sticks. He didn't want to light it. Fire could draw danger. But she was cold, and her skin had turned pale. She needed warmth. She was sleeping now, her head resting on a soft patch of moss. Her leg was bandaged, but the swelling hadn't gone down. Ray watched her breathe, slow and weak. He couldn't stop thinking about the trap, about the body they had seen, who was hunting her kind, and why. He looked at the sealed tin where the thorns twitched inside. Those things were alive, made with purpose. Someone had turned them into weapons. Ray's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden snap in the bushes. He jumped to his feet and grabbed a stick from the fire. Silence. Then, another snap, closer this time. Ray raised the burning stick like a torch and turned slowly. The jungle looked empty, but the feeling in his chest said otherwise. Then he saw them. Eyes. At first, just one pair, glowing yellow, watching from behind, a thick tree, then another, and another. More eyes appeared in the shadows, circling the fire. They were silent. They didn't move, only stared. Ray's grip tightened on the burning stick. His heart pounded. Zallar, he whispered. Wake up. She didn't move. Zallar, he said louder. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. The moment she saw the glowing eyes, she sat up fast. Her body froze. Fear filled her face. She whispered one word. Hunkar. Ray's blood ran cold. So this was them. The hunters. The ones who set the traps. Zallar grabbed his arm and pulled him closer to the ground. Lo, she whispered, pointing at the fire. He didn't understand at first, but then he saw. The creatures weren't just watching, they were waiting for the fire to die. Ray added more dry leaves and bark to the flames. The fire grew brighter. The eyes blinked, but didn't leave. Zallar whispered quickly in her language, pointing to the tall tree behind them. She made a climbing motion. Ray nodded. He helped her stand. Her leg trembled. She couldn't climb, alone. He tied his pack tight, picked her up, and began climbing the wide roots. The tree was huge, like an ancient tower. Thick branches formed a platform above. Ray placed Zallar on a large flat limb and climbed up beside her. They looked down. Below, the glowing eyes began to move. The creatures stepped into the firelight, tall, armored in dark bone. Their skin was rough and gray. Their jaws opened sideways, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. Ray had seen monsters before, but never like this, and they were carrying weapons, traps, chains, and spears tipped with live thorns. Zallar trembled. One of the creatures walked to the fire and sniffed the air. It reached into the flames and pulled out a burned piece of bark, sniffing it like it knew who had been there. Ray stayed still. Then, snap. A branch beneath him broke. The creature looked up, straight at him. Go, Ray whispered. He helped Zallar crawl to a higher branch. Below, the hunters began to climb the tree. Ray didn't wait. He pulled out his emergency flare gun. He had only one flare. He aimed at the ground and fired. The flare exploded in a blinding white light, lighting up the whole jungle. The creatures screamed and covered their faces. Some fell back. The light burned their sensitive eyes. Ray grabbed Zallar's hand and shouted, "Jump!" They leapt from the branch, landing hard in a bush. Zallar groaned in pain, but she clutched Ray's arm tightly. They ran, through the trees, through roots, through glowing vines, until they couldn't hear the hunters anymore. Finally, they collapsed beside a fallen log, both breathing hard. Both alive. Ray looked at Zallar. Her face was dirty, bruised, but her eyes still glowed. "You're not safe out here," he said. She looked at him and nodded slowly. Then she whispered, "Home, not far." Shelter of bones. Ray's legs burned. His lungs felt like fire, but he didn't stop running. Beside him, Zallar limped and held onto his arm tightly. Her silver skin was covered in scratches and her breath came in short, weak bursts. But she pushed forward. She had to. Behind them, the jungle was silent again. But Ray knew better now. Silence didn't mean safety. Silence meant the hunters were waiting. Zallar suddenly tugged his arm and pointed ahead. Her voice was soft but firm. "There." Ray looked. At first he saw only trees. Then he noticed a strange pattern in the leaves, like a curtain made of vines hanging in a perfect circle. They stepped through, and what lay behind it made Ray stop in shock. A wide cavern opened before them, hidden under the roots of a massive tree. Moss covered the walls. Strange white stones circled the floor. Dozens of glowing crystals floated gently above, casting soft blue light. It was beautiful and deadly, because scattered all over the cave were bones. Bones of Zallar's kind. Small ones, tall ones, old and broken. Some still had scraps of clothing. Ray slowly walked forward, careful not to step on anything. "This was," he whispered, "your home?" Zallar didn't answer. She knelt beside a broken skull and touched it gently. Her body trembled. A soft, painful sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a cry. It was a song. A mourning song. Ray stood back and let her grieve. He looked around. The cave wasn't just a graveyard. It had been a village once. Stone carvings on the walls showed families, harvests, celebrations. Now all that remained were bones and silence. Zallar finally stood up. Her eyes, still shining, met Ray's. "Hunkar, killed," she said quietly. Ray nodded. He understood. The hunters had wiped them out. Her family, her people, all for sport. Zallar motioned toward a smaller tunnel inside the cave. Ray followed her, and they reached a hidden room, dry and warm. Piles of old cloth, cracked pottery, and worn-out tools were scattered inside. A small bowl still held dust from something that had once been food. This was where she lived, Ray thought, where she played, where she laughed. Now it was a shelter made of memories and bones. He helped her sit down on a folded blanket. She looked at him, then reached under a stone slab. She pulled out a metal shard carved with symbols. She handed it to Ray. He didn't know what it meant, but her face was serious. She pressed the shard to her heart, then pointed to his chest. "You keep," she said. Ray frowned. "Why me?" She looked down, then said softly, "You heard me, when no one else did." Ray didn't know what to say. He took the shard and slipped it into his pocket. As night came again, Ray sealed the cave entrance with fallen branches and mud. He knew the Hunkar would keep looking for them. They didn't stop, not until their prey was dead. But this time, Ray wasn't just running. He was planning. He stared at the bones around him, his jaw tight. "They hunted you," he said. "Now, I'll hunt them." Zallar watched him, her lips moved. Not all humans are cruel. Ray sat beside her. Not all aliens are monsters either. She smiled faintly, and for the first time in days, they both slept. Safe, but only for now. The tribe that hunts Ray awoke to the smell of smoke, not jungle smoke, torch smoke. He sat up fast. Zallar was already awake, her eyes wide, her body trembling. She pointed toward the main tunnel. Faint footsteps echoed in the distance. Ray grabbed a sharp bone from the pile beside him. It wasn't a real weapon, but it was all he had. The hunters had found them, but as the footsteps got closer, something felt off. They weren't loud and careless like before. They were slow, careful, soft, almost respectful. Ray peeked out from behind a broken pillar of stone. He expected to see gray-skinned monsters with bone armor, but instead, he saw people. Aliens, yes, but not like the Hunkar. These ones wore cloaks made of leaves and bark. Their skin was dark brown and covered in painted lines. Their eyes glowed green, not yellow, and they were holding up their hands, in peace. Zallar let out a soft gasp. Then she stood up, using Ray's shoulder for support, and whispered, "Not hunters, watchers." Ray stepped forward slowly, showing his empty hands. The lead figure, tall and wrapped in vines, looked at him and spoke in a deep voice. "You carry the shard." Ray blinked. "What?" The alien pointed to Ray's chest, where the metal shard Zallar had given him was tucked inside his pocket. Ray slowly pulled it out. All of the strangers dropped to one knee. Even Ray didn't know what was happening. Zallar looked shocked too. She stepped forward and said something in her language. The tall alien replied with slow, heavy words. Then Zallar turned to Ray and explained, "They are protectors, from old tribes. They watched, but never acted." "Why now?" Ray asked. She hesitated, then said, "Because you acted." The protectors led them to a hidden village, deep in the jungle trees. It wasn't built on the ground. It was in the canopy above the reach of the Hunkar. Wooden walkways, leaf roof homes, and small fire pits lined the tall branches. Children peeked out from behind leaves. Elders watched silently. Ray had never seen anything like it. Zallar was taken to a healer. Her wounds were cleaned and wrapped in fresh herbs that smelled sweet and sharp. The swelling in her leg began to go down almost immediately. Ray sat beside her, trying to understand what was happening. The tall protector approached again. "You heard her cry," he said. Ray nodded. "You faced the darkness alone," the alien continued. "You protected the last seed of her kind." Ray frowned. "What do you mean, last seed?" The alien looked away, then said sadly, "Zallar may be the last survivor. Her blood carries the memory of her people. That makes her sacred." Ray looked at Zallar. She didn't look sacred. She looked tired, bruised, lonely. But maybe that was what made her so important. Later that night, Ray was taken to the Elder Tree, a giant structure in the center of the Canopy village. Inside, drawings covered the walls, stories of war, survival, and ancient promises. One story caught Ray's eye. It showed a human long ago, standing beside a silver-skinned alien like Zallar. Together, they were fighting back against the Hunkar. Ray turned to the elder. "Who is this?" The elder smiled. "The first one who heard the scream. The first one who stayed." Ray touched the drawing. He understood now. He wasn't the first human to help Zallar's people, but maybe he'd be the last. That night, Zallar sat under the stars on a branch high above the village. Ray joined her quietly. She looked at him and said, "I thought I would die in that trap." Ray looked down at the glowing jungle. "I thought you were a ghost," he said with a smile. She laughed softly. Then she turned serious. "You saved me, Ray. But this is not over." "No," he agreed. "It's just the beginning." She reached into a pouch and handed him a new weapon, a bone knife shaped like a fang. Old but sharp. "For what comes next," she said. Ray nodded and gripped it tightly. The hunt would turn. The truth of the jungle. The jungle was no longer just a wild place to Ray. It was alive. It remembered. It judged. And now, it whispered to him. He sat alone in the elder tree's heart, where ancient vines wrapped around the walls like veins. Blue light came from glowing stones in the ceiling. Around him, symbols told stories older than the stars. Zallar had been taken to rest. Her wounds were healing fast, thanks to the village's herbal medicines. But Ray couldn't sleep. Not tonight. The protector leader stepped into the chamber. His name was Valor, and his footsteps made no sound. He sat beside Ray and placed a small bowl between them, filled with red leaves floating in clear water. "You must drink." "Valor," said Ray, hesitated. "What is it?" "The memory root," Valor replied. "If you wish to understand the jungle, you must let it speak to you." Ray looked into the bowl. Then he drank. The world spun. The walls disappeared. Ray blinked, but he wasn't in the tree anymore. He was standing in the jungle, but everything was different. The trees were brighter, the air was warmer, and around him were dozens of Zalar's people, alive and joyful. Children played, mothers cooked food, warriors sang by the fire. Then, screams. The scene changed. Hunkar warriors stormed the village. They threw traps, crushed homes, and burned trees. Ray watched helplessly as the jungle turned red. The hunters captured the people, not to question them, not to learn from them, but to display them like animals. Ray fell to his knees. He saw Zalar as a child, hiding behind her mother. Then he saw her run into the jungle, alone, crying. The last to survive. The vision faded. Ray was back in the elder tree, sweating and shaking. Valor spoke gently. "Now you have seen." Ray nodded slowly. They weren't just hunted, they were erased. Valor closed his eyes. "The eye," Jungle remembers. "That is why it gave her voice back. That is why it brought you." Ray looked down at the knife Zalar had given him. It felt heavier now. He understood what had to be done. "The Hunkar must fall," Ray said. Valor's green eyes locked onto his. "Then we teach you the old ways." For the next 2 days, Ray trained with the protectors. They taught him to move without sound, to smell traps before he saw them, and to use vines as weapons. He learned how to carve marks into tree trunks, symbols that glowed at night to guide allies. Zalar, still limping, joined him on the 3rd day. Together they studied jungle paths. She showed him where her people used to hide food, where they placed alarms made of brittle leaves. Ray listened carefully. Every word, every sign, was part of her people's survival. She was the last seed of a forest nearly burned, but she was strong, stronger than anyone realized. That evening, the protectors gathered in the central branch clearing. A council of 6 stood in a circle. Ray and Zalar stepped into the middle. Valor spoke first. The jungle accepted the human. The sacred shard chose him. But one question remains. He turned to Ray. "Will you leave when it becomes hard?" Ray didn't speak right away. Then he looked at Zalar. And he said, "When I heard her scream, I thought it was just pain. But it wasn't. It was a call. For help. For justice. I'm not leaving until she's safe. Until they all are." Zalar's eyes filled with silent tears. She reached out and held his hand. The council placed a dark, green mark on Ray's arm, a paint made from jungle sap. "You are now bound to this land," Valor said. "Your blood will water its roots. Your breath will carry its truth." Ray nodded. He was ready. Later that night, Zalar gave Ray a small crystal. It flickered with soft blue light and hummed quietly in his palm. "This is our soul stone," she said. "Each family had one. This is mine." Ray looked at her. "Why give it to me?" "Because if I fall," she whispered, "someone must remember." Ray didn't answer. He simply closed his hand around the stone. He would remember. He would never forget. One man, one promise. The jungle was quiet again, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the calm before a storm. Ray stood at the edge of the high canopy, his arm painted with the green mark of the protectors. The soul stone Zalar had given him hung around his neck, glowing faintly with her people's light. Beside him, Zalar stood with a short spear in hand. Her limp had lessened. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and full of fire. Down below, torches moved in the dark. The Hunkar had returned, but this time, they were being watched. "They come to finish what they started," Ray said softly. Zalar nodded. "But now, we finish it." The protectors moved like ghosts through the trees, each one ready. Traps were set, vines were sharpened. The jungle itself had turned against the hunters. This was not a rescue mission, it was a rebellion. The first Hunkar stepped into the clearing beneath the elder tree. He carried a thorn spear and sniffed the air. Behind him, others followed. At least 10. Ray could see their glowing yellow eyes, their cruel armor made of bone. But this time the protectors didn't run. They waited. Then, Zalar lifted her hand. A signal. Ray dropped from the tree, landing hard in front of the Hunkar leader. The alien snarled. "You. Human." Ray stood tall. "You remember me." The Hunkar laughed. "The one who hides behind broken prey." Ray raised his voice. "I heard her scream, and I answered. You run from truth. You kill the weak because you fear the strong rising." The Hunkar roared and charged. Ray stepped aside, and the ground beneath the hunter gave way. Trap. The Hunkar fell into a pit of sharpened vines. Screams echoed. That was the signal. All around, the jungle exploded into life. Protectors jumped from the trees. Arrows made of bone and sap struck Hunkar armor. Traps closed around limbs. Smoke bombs filled the air. The hunters were confused, surrounded. And then Zalar stepped down. She walked slowly, calmly, holding her spear with both hands. One of the Hunkar turned to strike, but Ray blocked him, fighting with the curved bone blade she had gifted him. They clashed, metal against bone, growls against shouts. Ray bled, but he didn't back down. Then, silence. Ray stood panting, arm cut, eyes scanning. The ground was littered with fallen Hunkar. Only one remained, the leader. He staggered forward, wounded and furious. He pointed at Zalar. "Last of your kind," he growled. "You will fall like the rest." Zalar stepped forward. "I am not the last," she said. "I am the voice of all who died." Then she raised her spear and threw. It flew straight through the air and struck the hunter in the chest. The Hunkar dropped to his knees and fell. The jungle was quiet once more, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was peace. Later, under the stars, Ray and Zalar sat by a small fire. The protectors sang an old song. Children laughed. The soul stone around Ray's neck glowed warmly. "You kept your promise," Zalar said softly. Ray looked at her. "You kept yours." She smiled. "You were not born in this jungle, but it chose you." Ray took the soul stone and placed it in her hands. "No," he said. "It chose us." She held the stone to her chest, eyes glistening. "For the first time in many years," she whispered, "the jungle is alive again." The camera rises, showing the jungle glowing with lights from the tree villages. A new home, a new beginning, and at the center of it, one human who answered a scream in the trees and never turned away. The end.